On his quest for the Infinity Stones, Ronan the Accuser sets his eyes on Earth, where the Mind Stone is currently located. But the Kree warlord should have known that getting his hand on the stone would not be so easy. Now Ronan is forced to team up with an AI that has gone rogue, and instead of the Guardians of the Galaxy, the Avengers will be standing in his way this time. Location: Sokovia, Hydra Base. Time: 7:30 a.m. The sun was just beginning to rise over Sokovia, the white snow glistening as the first rays of sunlight hit it. It was a serene sight, quiet due to lack of activity, which was understandable considering it was still early in the morning. There were a few active folks in town though, a middle-aged man making his way to work at a factory nearby. In one of the apartment windows, you can see an elderly woman preparing food for her 3 cats. And then there was the thing flying across the sky. A robot? It flew through the air, its body incredibly damaged due to its recent battle, but by some miracle it made it all the way to its destination in one piece. But the robot's boosters eventually ran out of power, and it soon collided with the snow-covered ground, skidding across the earth until it hit a brick wall. Grabbing its face, the robot let out a curse and then looked down at its mutilated hand. The owner of the hand, of this impaired body, is called Ultron. At least that was the name given to him by his human creator, Tony Stark. Ultron further examined his body, disgusted by the similarities it bore to Stark's Iron Man suit. The helmet, the Avengers symbol painted on the left side of its chest. The AI needed a better form, to build something that gave him his own identity. Crawling the rest of the way, since walking on one leg was not exactly ideal, Ultron finally made it inside the large building, which used to be a base for the evil organization Hydra. Until the Avengers raided it a few days ago, that is. Making his way up the steps to the entrance doors, the AI was stopped when an unfamiliar voice addressed him from behind. Ultron looked over his shoulder and saw a tall figure looming over him, eyeing what the robot had in his hand. Even Ultron had to look down at what he was holding, completely forgetting about the object he was carrying. But even so, the AI had unconsciously kept a firm grip on it, knowing it was important. The object was a sleek golden scepter with the tip glowing a light blue. This radiance was caused by a small object, a stone that gave the scepter its power. That was what the stranger wanted. If he desired, the newcomer could easily overpower Ultron and take the stone for himself. Location: Johannesburg, South Africa, the Churchill. Time: 3:32 p.m. Making their grand entrance, the Avengers appeared within the old, rusted ship and were ready to confront Ultron and his minions. Well, until they realized the person before them was not the psychotic killer robot they were looking for. The heroes looked upon their new enemy and noticed how the tall man was not a human either, with his blue skin and black markings that were streaked across his face. Iron Man addressed the stranger as Sully and demanded that he tell the Avengers if he was working with Ultron. Sully arched an eyebrow, clearly confused by the name, but he ignored it and introduced himself as Ronan, Ronan the Accuser. And all the Avengers needed to know was that he was there to stop them. As if on cue, 2 more figures emerged from the shadows to stand behind Ronan, and they looked prepared for a fight. Fine then. The Avengers would give their enemies the fight of their lives. Without warning, Ronan slammed the end of his staff, the universal weapon as he called it, onto the ground, and the bridge they were all standing on began to shake. Wisps of violet energy snaked their way down the bridge, wrapping around the structure until they reached the heroes who were standing on the other side. The three Avengers, Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor, immediately jumped out of the way before the foreign energy could touch them. But they did not know that the attack was simply a distraction. Out of nowhere, a blue blur sped past Cap and knocked him back into some nearby barrels. As Iron Man was about to fly to his comrade's aid, a blast of crimson energy struck him in his chest. He was thrown against the wall and momentarily disoriented by the strike, but he quickly brushed it off. Black Widow and Hawkeye, who had been keeping themselves hidden until this point, finally made their presences known and joined the fray. The female S.H.I.E.L.D. agent took out her dual batons, electroshock weapons she used to temporarily incapacitate one of the Iron Legion drones Ronan had summoned. Hawkeye fired one of his arrows at another robot, and a small EMP was emitted from the projectile, resulting in the drone plummeting to the ground in a heap. Now that leaves Thor to handle Ronan. Mjolnir, the god of Thunder's hammer, clashed with Ronan's own weapon, sending a shockwave through the ship due to their immense power. While caught in this bind, the Kree warlord commented on how much Thor looked like his mother, Frigga. The comment caught Thor off guard, and he asked about what Ronan knew of his family. Ronan laughed, stating that Asgard and its royal family were known quite well throughout the galaxy, and the Kree will make sure to take Thor's hammer as a trophy once their battle is over, which it would not be until the god was dead at Ronan's feet. Thor glared at his opponent, before using his strength to shove Ronan away, and then the god swung his hammer downwards onto the ground. The earth before him shook as powerful lightning bolts burst forth, and they rushed towards their target. But Ronan was one step ahead, and he again summoned violet energy to do his bidding, the universal weapon now glowing with power. Once the bolts of lightning were close enough to Ronan, they suddenly dispersed into small sparks. Confused, Thor's attention was now on his opponent's weapon, and he noticed how it shined similarly to the scepter Ultron had stolen from them the night before. The scepter that originally belonged to his brother Loki, the god of mischief. Could it be that this Ronan possessed one of the Infinity Stones? When this was all over, the god would make sure to look more into this. Meanwhile, Captain America hurled his shield again at his adversary, a man with short white hair. But his target easily dodged the shield and he sprinted across the room towards Cap, with the world seemingly moving in slow motion. The man was gifted with the power of super speed, and he used his gift to run literal circles around Captain America, uppercutting the hero when he was close enough. The captain stumbled back into a wall and grabbed his throbbing jaw, but he shook off the pain. He needed to figure out a way to stop the speedster. The speedster's sister, who was currently fighting Iron Man, caught a glance of Cap as he was regaining his composure. The woman smirked and looked back to Iron Man as she slowly stepped back into the shadows. Iron Man utilized his boosters to charge at his opponent, but when he reached her position, the hero realized the woman was gone. But where did she go? With a hand on his head, Captain America looked up just in time to see the woman now standing beside him, and in her hands, red energy coiled around her fingers. Before he could act, the crimson tendrils were thrusted into his face, and his eyes glowed red for a moment, but they instantly returned to normal. But the same could not be said for his mental state, which was now in turmoil. What did that witch do to him? Back with Thor, the god was looking as though he had the upper hand, as he hurled a barrage of lightning at Ronan, who was hiding behind a pillar to avoid the attack. Suddenly appearing by the Kree's side was the woman, and with a nod, he gave his approval to commence with their plan. Vanishing once more, the woman reappeared behind Thor, who was so focused on Ronan that he failed to notice her presence, at least until the god turned around and washed it with the same energy as Captain America moments before. And like his friend, Thor's eyes were crimson for a moment, as the spell the woman had casted upon him was taking effect. Iron Man called out to Thor, finally spotting his former opponent doing something to the god. But whatever she was doing, Iron Man was about to put a stop to it. The armored hero rushed to help his friend, but again, he was halted in his advance. Something suddenly grabbed onto Iron Man's ankle, and he looked over his shoulder at Ronan, the Kree's grip tightening. Ronan then launched Iron Man to the other side of the room, and the hero ended up crashing through the wall of the ship. Iron Man managed to straighten himself before he collided with the ground outside, and he flew into the air to look down at the Churchill. Stepping through the hole Iron Man had created when he was tossed, Ronan looked back at his enemy with his warhammer in hand. Iron Man demanded that the warlord tell him what the woman had done to Thor. Ronan shook his head and explained that the woman Wanda was her name, had her own special abilities like her brother Pietro. One of her powers was telepathy, and she could use it to manipulate the minds of her opponents, which was what she was doing to Thor, Captain America, and the rest of the team right now. Raising a hand at Ronan, Iron Man assured the Kree that the Avengers would stop his and Ultron's plans. But what his enemy said next was deeply concerning. Ronan said in order to stop them, Iron Man would first have to stop the big one. Who else could that be referring to? Iron Man could feel panic rising within him, but he remained calm and sped off to the Quinjet, where the strongest Avenger was waiting for his cue to join the battle, unaware of Wanda stealthily making her way around the jet. Location: Seoul, South Korea. Dr. Helen Cho's laboratory. Time: 4:14 p.m. In the center of the room, a large container had been placed, rectangular in shape with a glass window on the top, so those outside can see what was within it. And what was inside the container, the cradle, was a body, or at least a body in the making. Small blue lasers were literally printing body tissue, and the mass of tissue was slowly taking form. But what the cradle was producing, it was a mystery to most, but not to Ultron. The robot stood over the cradle, the silver plating of his new body glistening as the light that illuminated from within the container shined through. Dr. Cho, now under Ultron's control, commented on the beauty of her boss's creation. As a geneticist, Cho could not help but be amazed by the way the vibranium was bonding with the tissue cells. Ultron shook his head and made a remark about how humans had used the most versatile material in the world to make a frisbee, which was definitely referring to Captain America's shield. Standing in a corner of the lab, Ronan scoffed and claimed that such actions were typical of humans. They scratch the surface and never think to dig deeper. Ronan looked down at his weapon, the hammer glowing dimly in the dark room, and the Kree was reminded of how he came to have the stone that was placed within it, and that annoying human. Ronan was pulled from his thoughts by the sound of something breaking, and he turned back to Ultron, who was watching as one of his drones held something in its hand. Something small and a brilliant gold in color. Finally, it was in his sights. The Mind Stone. The drone stood by the cradle and moved to place the stone in its hand on the head of the incomplete body. But that was when Ronan decided to make his move. With a wave of his weapon, a beam of violet energy shot out from it and blasted the drone in its chest. The robot's form disintegrated in an instant, and the Mind Stone fell to the floor. Ultron was momentarily stunned by the action, but he quickly regained his composure and turned to face Ronan. But he too was struck by an energy blast, and the AI flew across the room until his back collided with a wall. Immediately, the other drones in the laboratory rushed towards Ronan, but they were no match for the warlord, as he slammed the bottom of his warhammer onto the floor. A powerful wave exploded throughout the lab, and Ultron's drones were destroyed, much like their comrade before them. Dr. Cho ducked for cover, afraid of what Ronan would do to her if she stood in his way. But the Kree assured her that she was safe, for now. He was still in need of her expertise. The same could be said for the Doctor's former employer. And speaking of him, Ronan approached Ultron's damaged body, slumped against the wall. The AI was not so surprised by the betrayal, but what concerned him most was the source of Ronan's power. He had a hunch, but Ultron wanted his theory to be confirmed. Ronan was eager to explain things to Ultron, and the Warlord glanced at his weapon. Pointing a finger at the Warhammer, Ronan said that there was another of the Infinity Stones encased within the weapon, the Power Stone. But while the Power Stone was useful, Ronan wanted all the stones in order to fully utilize their strength, and with the Mind Stone, the Kree would be able to control the minds of others, and use them what he wanted. Ronan further elaborated that he only let Ultron live, so the AI could build him an army to be placed under his control once the Mind Stone was in his grasp. Now, the only reason Ultron was still breathing was because of the body in the cradle. The mind transfer will still take place, but once it is complete, Ultron will become Ronan's own Dark Avenger. Location: S.H.I.E.L.D. Control Room. Time: 5:56 p.m. Stepping through the entrance doors, the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury, stomped his way to the front of the room, where his right hand was standing with a tablet in her hands. But the moment Fury came into view, Maria Hill looked away from the device and immediately gave her boss a briefing of recent events. After the incident in Johannesburg, the Avengers were forced to go into hiding since the public deemed them responsible for the damage caused. Even though the Hulk, who was under the influence of Wanda Maximoff, was not in control of his actions, Iron Man was only trying to stop his friend's rampage. Of course, Hill and Fury were both aware of the Avengers' location, but the last thing they wanted was for others to find out the hero's location and hunt them down to be arrested, or worse. Nick asked Maria if there was any news on Ultron or Ronan's whereabouts, but the woman shook her head. Their most recent enemies have been awfully quiet since the incident in South Africa. That was never a good sign, like the calm before the storm. But that was when Maria spotted something strange appearing on their radars. The woman sat down at one of the computers and typed in a command to display the scanner's view in the center of the room as a hologram. With his hands clasped behind his back, Nick let out a deep sigh, and then turned back to Maria. The African American gave his right hand the command to contact Hawkeye again. They were going to need the Avengers' help if they wanted to get out of this alive. Location: Seoul, South Korea. Outskirts. Time: 6:41 p.m. In the middle of an open field, a large warship landed slowly onto the grass. Its sleek black coating was a stark contrast to the bright and sunny setting that surrounded it, making the ship stand out more than it already did. Someone soon stepped out of the warship to approach Ronan and bowed before his lord. From a distance, this soldier could be mistaken for a human wearing unusual military garb, but upon closer inspection you could see he shared features close to insects on Earth, such as his insect-like mandible and 4 fingers being on each of his hands. These were characteristics common to Sakurans, an alien race from the planet Sakaar. But as the Sakurans stood from the ground, he noticed the massive robots standing behind Ronan. The drones were quiet, idle as they waited for their new boss's orders. Ronan briefly looked over his shoulder at his army of robotic slaves, before turning back to the soldier and waving a dismissive hand. The Kree simply said that the drones worked for him now, so there was no need to worry. The Sakaran nodded, but made sure to keep an eye on the robots for now. Ronan then ordered the drones to get inside the warship so they could leave. But before they could even move, the warlord saw something in the sky nearing his position. Iron Man landed on the ground, followed by Thor, who was holding on to Captain America, and the Hulk, who was carrying Black Widow and Hawkeye. When the giant green creature settled his comrades on the grass, Hawkeye tried his best to hold back his urge to puke right then and there while mumbling that he never wanted to do that again. Iron Man ignored his friend, knowing that the man will be fine, and instead focused on Ronan. Iron Man asked the Kree where his partner was hiding, obviously referring to Ultron. Ronan chuckled while pointing a finger at the sky. The heroes followed his gaze and were shocked to see someone silently hovering above them. This man, was it even a man? He was not exactly a robot, but whoever or whatever he was wearing a black and green bodysuit with a scarlet cape flowing behind him. His skin was a brighter shade of red than his cape, but the abnormal skin color was not what really caught the hero's attention. It was his eyes, which were a pale blue, like those under the control of the Mind Stone. Looking back down at Ronan, Iron Man asked about Dr. Cho, as they were aware of her involuntary assistance in the creation of Ultron's new body. The person flowing above must be Ultron in his new form. So, Cho was no longer needed. Ronan quickly explained that the human woman was still alive. He honestly did not see any point in killing her, but he said for the Avengers not to confuse his mercy for him suddenly taking a liking to humans. It simply was not necessary. Iron Man thanked Ronan for sparing Helen, but he raised his hand to the Kree and said that the action did not absolve Ronan of his recent crimes. Humans have died because of Ronan and Ultron, and they would pay for it. The warlord stated that if they allowed him to leave Earth right now, they would live to see another day. After all, there was only one thing on Ronan's mind, and it was not the destruction of Earth. Not now, anyway. But despite Ronan's generous offer, the Avengers stood their ground and Hulk let out a resonating roar, eager to battle his enemies. Ronan sighed and shook his head, clearly disappointed, but he had expected as much. And to get rid of the Avengers, the Kree will call upon his new enforcer, Ultron. The heroes struggled against the AI before, so there was no way they could defeat him now in his new advanced body. Or could they?